Andy Hill, welcome to Bruin to Bruin.
Good to be here. I am a Bruin. You're a Bruin. Bruin to Bruin.
There you go. You figured it out.
I did.
So you've started your collegiate basketball career off the back of one of the greatest dynasties in history. When you think back to your time at UCLA, what is the first memory that comes to mind when you originally started?
Oh, just the hope of being a part of a tremendous dynasty, a dynasty that sort of seemed to represent everything that was good in sports. Very clean-cut group of guys playing very appealing basketball, fast break basketball, lots of scoring. I love the music. I love the cheerleaders. I grew up in Westwood, so it was it was the beginning of a dream. It didn't quite turn out the way I dreamt it, but it was the beginning of a dream.
How did you dream it?
Well, I dreamt it that I was. By the way, I didn't think I was going to be a big professional basketball player. Young people today don't really understand that in those days, professional basketball players actually had to work in the summertime. They didn't make that much money. So it wasn't like, oh my God, I want to play pro. I'll become independently wealthy. And I thought, I'm a little white dude. What are the chances I'm going to make the NBA? So what it was really about for me was being part of UCLA basketball. It was just so cool. Pauley Pavilion was sold out every night. And it was just a trip of a lifetime to be a part of the greatest dynasty ever. It's still a part of our fabric here at UCLA. We're still thought of as a basketball school. Coach Wooden's last title was 75. That's, if my math is any good, about 50 years ago. But it made such an impression on people because it's so improbable. He did it with different players. He did it in different eras. They took the dunk away from Kareem. He did it without Kareem and Bill. He did it with the smallest teams ever. So it was really something that, in hindsight, I'm unbelievably stunned I got to be a part of it.
And before all of that, before the genesis of this aspiration to join the Bruins as a professional collegiate basketball player, you were into baseball for a little bit. Is that right? That was one of your passions?
Well, yeah, I love baseball. But at the time I was just entering puberty, basketball was a lot more action. Baseball, you stood around a lot. And in 1963, when I was 13, UCLA went on a run to their first national championship. So at the point in time that I was trying to decide, what do you really love? Here was this Bruin team, no one bigger than 6'5". So you kind of figured anybody could play for these guys. And I fell hard. At that point, baseball fell by the wayside, and all I wanted to do was play basketball. But that was way before I had any dreams of playing at UCLA. I went to University High School right near here, and that was my dream. Wow, I want to play in high school. Seemed like a big idea to a kid.
Were there any other colleges that were on the table before you committed to UCLA?
Well, this is once again ancient history. I graduated mid-semester. And so I had a lot of schools writing to me, but when John Wooden said, we'd like you to come to UCLA, when your dream school comes calling, I'm still kind of amazed that they did, but, I was an easy sell.
So Wooden approached you, is that right?
Well, they always approach you. The assistant coaches really did the most of the recruiting. Coach Wooden was not what you would, I came up and had dinner with him a couple of times at training table. First time I came up here, I had dinner sitting between Coach Wooden and, at the time, Lou Alcindor. He became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I'm by nature not the world's fastest eater, and Coach Wooden had what I assume is his Midwestern Indiana habit, where he would sit down and he'd cut up the whole steak before he put it. I was taught you take a piece and you put down your knife and fork and you take a little bit. He cut the whole doggone thing up. So within like 3 minutes, he'd finished, and we were supposed to be talking, and I'm sitting between him and Kareem. It was pretty awkward. But, he was interesting because he undersold. Other coaches all oversold. His whole approach was, here's what I'm offering. I'm offering a world-class education. By the way, that's what he talked about first. Do they still go to school, these guys? I have no idea. I guess they do.
On paper, right.
Talked about a world-class education and then an opportunity to compete for playing time. Not a guaranteed starting time, not I'm going to let you shoot. No, an opportunity to compete for playing time. And, that appealed to a certain kind of person, I guess, that had a little bit of show me in it. Like, okay, I'll come, I'll show you. And so I came, but I didn't show them.
But he never emphasized performance metrics, did he? Like victories, points scored.
No.
That was never his thing, was it?
Never. And I think the fact that he never talked about winning, which people find hard to believe. When I was there, we went 87-3. How did he never talk about winning? He only recruited players from teams that were very successful. None of the guys who he recruited were like big scorers on teams that didn't do well. They were all part of a team. And so if you have people who really want to win, do you need to keep talking about it? Because the truth of it is they probably want to win too much. I mean, my old buddy Bill Walton was just a ferocious competitor. He couldn't let it go. His whole life, he couldn't let losses go. And, I thought Coach was right, but, Bill would argue to the day he died, no, you got to win. It's no good if you don't win. And Coach Wooden just had this idea that ultimately in life, first of all, it's just basketball. It's just a game. I mean, it's not life and death. You kind of make it out to be, but it isn't. It's a game. It's an entertainment. And hopefully there are a lot of other things that come out of it. And, hopefully we get a chance to talk about that a little bit, because obviously my experience at UCLA so deeply impacted my life and business that seemingly had nothing to do with anything I'd done at UCLA, that, really made this experience a game changer for me.
Well, talking about the lessons that you learned in college transitioning over into your personal and professional career, I know that you wrote a book, Be Quick, But Don't Hurry. John Wooden wrote the foreword to that book, didn't he?
Yes.
The foreword, and I'm going to quote, "This book, written by one former student, gives me special pleasure because the author not only studied hard, but took the concepts and elements of my teachings and added his own experiences to envision the lessons in ways that go beyond the original teachings. There is nothing more satisfying for a teacher than watching his students make his lessons their own." What does it mean to you that he said that?
Everything. I mean, we all admired Coach deeply. I think that it also gives you a sense of why he was someone you'd admire, that he was quite genuine in expressing, wow, you took my stuff and made it better. That's pretty generous for someone who's generally considered the greatest coach of all time. When I let him read the book for the first time, he sent me a beautiful handwritten thank you note. I think I might have mentioned it to you folks in class the other day. What an interesting thing to do if you want to be one out of a pile of people who are applying. Send a thank you note with a stamp on it. Not an internet electronic digital note, but a pen and ink note. Quick, say thank you. Well, Coach, when he got my book and read it, he sent me, because he was such an intellectual, it was a poem from Robert Burns, I believe. Ah, but the gift he gave us, to see ourselves as others see us, would from many a blunder free us. Fascinating, right? A basketball coach sending you a philosopher's quote, reading your book. And, it really also is an indication of his view of his own role, which was he was a teacher. Nothing is more satisfying to a teacher than to see that student take those pieces of the puzzle that you gave him and rearrange them and make a picture you'd never imagined. And I think that's what gave Coach the most pleasure. He was proud of the guys who went and played in the NBA. He was every bit as proud as the guys who became teachers and doctors and attorneys. If they did a job well, he was very proud of them. People find it hard to believe, how could John Wooden be so humble? I mean, he won all these championships and people just virtually worship. How could he be so humble? Because he didn't think he was better than anybody else. If, somebody did a great job sweeping up after the game, but they did a great job. That he'd just won a national championship was no more important than someone who came in and did a good job cleaning up the locker room. It was really the way he viewed everyone. And I think it allowed him in many cases to reach out to people who he might, not have been necessarily able to reach, because they really understood this was a very simple, kind, humble man at his core, who at the same time was tough as nails, but never swore, which, obviously is a little bit different than some of our coaches today.
There was a commonly term substitute he used, where when he used that term, you'd know he was angry.
Yes.
What was it?
It was a goodness gracious sakes alive.
That was it.
And we had no question we were being cussed out. But of course, once again, when you think about it, when you cuss somebody out using swear words, there's no instruction in them. You do need to make people aware you're not happy. This will not work. You will not continue to play if you keep making this mistake. You need to understand I'm very upset. But adding, the magic words that so many coaches use today doesn't do anything more than make that coach vulnerable to being cited for a hostile work environment and fired by the HR department. Because there is no environment in America where the language contemporary coaches use is tolerated. Nowhere, except in the sports world. And if, in fact, the sports world, as it claims, is building leaders of tomorrow, then why do they let their leaders cuss them out? Because it will get every young guy and woman who goes into a leadership position fired immediately if they speak to them like these coaches dress down their players.
What do you think is missing? What piece of the puzzle is missing there? What are coaches today not understanding about their roles that John Wooden did understand?
Well, first of all, I don't want to criticize today's coaches. The world is so different and changing so fast. I mean, they have to go out and raise NIL money. They become fundraisers. And then another piece of it that nobody really thinks about is that once they've raised this NIL money, then they have to become literally the general manager. How much does Aidan get?
Nada.
How much does Mia get? How much does Max get? But no, he's got to decide. He's got to say, this is how much you're worth, because he's got X amount of NIL money. Well, that's a pretty easy way to piss somebody off. How come you gave him more money than you gave me? I mean, it sets up so many problems. And of course, now, no one used to transfer. I can't remember anyone really transferring out of UCLA. At the end of the year, Mick Cronin's going to have to re-recruit every guy who's already on his team. They never spent a second doing that. So it's a very, very difficult environment. There are cameras everywhere. There's 24/7 cable sports talk. None of that stuff used to exist. So I hesitate to really criticize these people, but what I would say is in the last couple of years, Jay Wright quit, Tony Bennett quit, and Jim Larinaga quit. Those are three of the finest coaches in America. When three of your finest coaches quit, that's a canary in the coal mine. Something is very, very wrong. And what's really wrong is that the system has completely stopped focusing on the young student athlete, and it has become professional sports. And I think that's sad.
It seems like one of the sort of consequences to be wary of outrageous success is it becomes a production. And once it becomes a production, substance tends to fall out of the list of priorities. So how do you suggest, how do you suggest we remedy that if you want to start bottom up at UCLA? A message to Mick Cronin.
I think these folks are more focused on it than I could ever be. I think they realize it's really not in their control. I think they're doing as good a job as they can do under the circumstances. I think that Mick got caught a year behind raising that NIL money, and he made up for it this year. But, I can promise you, Mick's a friend of mine. Mick didn't get into coaching to become a fundraiser. None of these people did. Now, keep in mind, they're also making a ton of dough. John Wooden never made more than $32,500 a year. These guys are all making multiple millions of dollars. So they are being paid for it, for the aggravation. But at the same time, I do really feel we've sort of lost something that was uniquely American, where college sports, there was, places you could go where there truly were student athletes competing against other student athletes because they loved to play a game. The idea that these guys in football play all year with their teammates and get to a bowl game and then say, I'm not going to play. I can't imagine that. I don't want to go out with the fellas one more time. You got to be kidding me. That was the greatest thing in the world. But it's become so professional. Oh, I don't want to hurt myself. The draft is coming up. And so, I more than anything feel bad for the athletes because I think they've lost that opportunity to do something just because they love it. That's why we did it. I just loved it.
I want to jump very quickly to your transition of athlete to media executive. Was that planned?
No.
How did that happen?
No, none of my life was planned. Plans are lovely. They never work out. You just got to keep knocking on doors and see which ones open up. I sort of slipped in the side door of the media business in the sense that I had a brother who was in the business who was a total opposite. So I not only didn't have an interest, I thought I wouldn't be interested if he was, but he kept telling me, Andy, I think you'll do great in this business. You should do this. And I was working actually for a couple of UCLA professors, running a research organization for them. And my brother had a movie at ABC about Rocky Marciano, a boxer. And he needed 2 months worth of research done in 2 weeks. So he called me. That was my brother, nice guy that he was. And I loved it. I mean, I loved being in the stacks. I'm a pre-internet guy. I love going and exploring Powell Library and finding things that I couldn't find anywhere else. And I just really got into it. I loved it. And so after I'd finished doing that, I did something really stupid. I decided that I would like to be in that business, and not knowing that actually this isn't really something you do, because everybody says, what do I do? Well, I did something nobody would do because it's stupid. I wrote up 3 different treatments for movies of the week. Who was I? I wasn't a writer. I was some guy on the street, and then started calling producers to go in and pitch them, which I could tell you right now, that's stupid. Nobody's going to call you back. You don't know. You never. Well, of course, you don't know who will call you back. And somebody called me back and read them and actually offered me a job. So, and from there, I was fortunate enough to get a bunch of other opportunities. And, the thing to know is every time you get a new opportunity, the first day at work, if you're not scared to death, you didn't take a big enough job. But, things worked out. I got very lucky. I had a wonderful career at Hollywood, ran into a really unpleasant fellow by the name of Leslie Moonves, who got fired by CBS, but long after he fired me. And what seemed like the worst thing that ever happened to me, being fired, turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't know that I ever would have called John Wooden if Les hadn't fired me. So, one thing I would say to keep in mind for Bruins everywhere is it may seem like the worst thing that ever happened. What are you going to do with it? Which is one of the reasons that I think Coach was so insistent on people not reacting too much to wins or losses. Because what he knew, and I think this is true in anything, is that when you lose, there's a reason you lost. And it isn't the referees. That's ridiculous. There's a reason you lost. Find out what it is. Fix it. But when you're all upset, you're screaming about the other coach, and this guy got away with that, and the crowd was doing, well, you're never going to get better. So he understood the value in keeping an even head about winning and losing. Now, we went 87-3, so we didn't lose much, but that was certainly the way he was when we lost. I think that when we lost, first of all, we never lost a game that mattered. That's important to know. The games we lost didn't matter. And he actually seemed kind of happy to me when we lost, because he realized that now in practice, instead of coaching an undefeated team, he was coaching a team that had just lost, and they were probably going to listen a little better. When you're undefeated, you tend to stop listening.
Did his manner ever change? It probably changed from your perspective after you'd lost a game. Did his manner of coaching, teaching ever change after a big victory, after a big loss? Was it always consistent?
It was totally consistent, yeah. I'll tell you a great story, because this really is very much Coach. First national championship team I was a part of, we had beaten Jacksonville. They had a big guy, Artis Gilmore's in the Hall of Fame, 7'2", in Cole Fieldhouse in Maryland. And, the alumni is going wild, and you could hear them outside the locker room, and they're yelling and screaming. And I'm getting ready to leave the locker room, and there are only a couple people left in the locker room. And I look over in the corner of the locker room, and there was Coach, who was bending down to pick up an orange peel to throw it in the trash. And I think you've realized this, Aidan. We spent time together. I'm kind of a wise guy, I went over and said, hey, Coach, there's 1,000 alumni out there waiting to pat you on the back. You're throwing orange peels in the trash can? And he looked at me and he said, Andy, I take great pride in getting letters from janitors saying we had the cleanest locker room in America. And he wasn't kidding. I mean, you could kind of think that you got to be kidding. But that was him. He thought that was respectful. And by the way, respectful to people he would never see, right? And there are plenty of people who would say in that same situation, well, they get paid to clean up the locker room. Why shouldn't we leave it a mess? But that wasn't Coach.
It reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever seen the TV series Ted Lasso.
Oh, of course, yeah. Well, they got the Pyramid of Success on the wall.
They've got the Pyramid of Success up there. And they probably studied a little bit of sort of some of these stories in some regard, because they really emphasize in that show the camaraderie between the groundskeepers and the players and the coaches. You know, they always leave the locker rooms in great condition. Everything's clean. So I was just kind of putting that together in my head. Okay, they must have really looked into this.
I think you would actually be stunned knowing how many coaches are deeply impacted by John Wooden. And, you know, for this to be a Bruin to Bruin podcast, the one thing I'd love everybody at UCLA to understand is he's part of your legacy. He's part of your degree. And no one, you heard his reaction to my book, right? The reaction to the book. I'm so glad somebody took what I taught him and did better. Wow, that's great. No one would love knowing, and I know he's gone, but, you know, I kind of feel like he still knows that people were taking these very simple lessons that he utilized, invented, call what you want, but didn't just create them, set them down on paper, wrote book after book after book, gave lecture after lecture after lecture, trying to tell people, this is how I did it. No secrets. He wasn't hiding a rabbit anywhere. This is how I did it. This is how I was successful in getting a group of people. And by the way, keep in mind, high school All-Americans, big egos, want to score themselves, right? You need talent in an organization, but the truth of it is really talented people want to do it themselves. How do you get a group of really talented young men with big egos to work together towards a common goal and achieve it year after year after year? Well, what I would say is everyone should have a leadership philosophy. Every Bruins leadership philosophy should be John Wooden. Now, maybe you can find a better one. I'd be happy to look at it. I've never seen a better one. And he's us. You know, when I tell people in classes that I've spoken to, you know, go ahead, say you majored in anthropology, but you got a minor in John Wooden, and there's not a job interview that won't stop, and somebody will say, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? At which point you can define who you are through someone who's very famous. You know, this is how I believe in carrying myself with dignity and humility, acting with integrity, making sure that everyone's accountable, and playing really, really hard. Because John Wooden was no softy. He was one tough guy. But that's what I believe. And, you know, I think that really is, at the end of the day, part of what's attractive about UCLA. It's funny. I don't think that many people come to UCLA thinking, I hope I'm going to get rich. I think most people come to UCLA because they want to do something in the world. And if they can make some money in the process, that's terrific. I got paid to do TV shows, but I wanted to do TV shows that I thought people could watch with their family, that had values in them. And by the way, having values isn't free. I mean, there are plenty of people in Hollywood who tell you, oh, boy, Andy, he did shows like Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and Touched by an Angel, and Walking, these hokey. Yeah, I get, okay, they were hokey. Millions and millions of people watched them and will watch them till the end of time, and that makes me happy. And I was able to watch them with my kids, but did everybody like him? No. But I guess I kind of learned that from Coach. He wasn't for everybody. There were people who didn't like him too. And they always had the stupidest reason, which was he thinks he's better than us, which was ridiculous. He never did.
Did he ever expand on where these cornerstones of his philosophy came from?
Well, okay, I'm going to give you a little gem here on your podcast.
Please.
He gave me a book, a little bit of a story, but I'm going to tell you the title of the book first. It's called The Majesty of Calmness, Calmness, by William George Jordan. It's $5. It's written in 1890. And he gave me a copy of it about a year before he died with a message, read it, and then read it again, which nobody had ever said to me, giving me a book, but it's a little tiny book. It's 40 pages long. So I can do that. And I'm going to admit something here, Aidan, that I probably shouldn't admit, which is I went through UCLA and never had an underliner. I never studied. I read every book. I went to every class. but I was able to just get by not underlining. But I started to read this book and I said, I need a yellow underliner. And I started underlining it and I couldn't stop. Now, keep in mind, though this book was written in 1890, it was written as like a pamphlet. It's a kind of, it's in public domain. The kind of thing doesn't exist anymore. And I'm frustrated because what I'd love to ask Coach, and I never did, was, did your dad read you this book when you were growing up in Indiana? Because it is the schematic for his philosophy. So if you want to really get a origin story of where did you, now he obviously got a lot from his dad, he got a lot from his coaches, but if you go back and read William George Jordan, which really defines kind of the depth of Coach's philosophy, it's all in The Majesty of Calmness, which I've given away probably 1,000 now, and no one, I don't know why he gave it to me. No one else has seen it. Kareem hadn't seen it. Bill hadn't seen it. Mike Warren, Lucius, he gave it to me, but maybe he knew I'd buy a lot of them. I don't know.
Did you ask for it?
No, he just one day he said, I think that you'll really enjoy this book. And then, by the way, what was a real killer was I lost it.
Awesome.
Killer. I lost it. And then 4 years later, I was in St. Louis. I did a newsletter for Edward Jones, big brokerage house. And we were back in St. Louis, and I finished my book, and I went to the airport early, and I said, I'll get another book, and I forgot. And I got on the plane, and I started scrabbling around in my bag, and under that cardboard thing, there it was, The Majesty of Calmness. And I read it again, and I've read it many, many times. It just strikes me so much how much it is like him. I've got a picture in my family room that I kind of see when I watch TV, where I'm standing there with Coach and Bill Walton, and they're both gone. And I realized, wow, what a lucky guy I was. These were my dudes. These were my guys. And why? Because I went to UCLA.
It's a pretty impressive crew. I mean, when you kind of drop these names, I mean, John Wooden, he is, to someone like me who I wouldn't even consider myself, up until the last year, a mainstream collegiate basketball player or follower. And I'd heard of John Wooden.
Right.
I mean, his sort of impact and legacy reverberates along so many different domains. And the same goes for Bill and Kareem. So it's pretty incredible just kind of hearing these stories.
Well, and this is the interesting thing, Aidan, that I hope all of people in Bruin land understand is you meet these former Bruin athletes in person, they're just as cool as you would hope they would be. I found many times in life, because I worked in the entertainment business, you had a expectation of who someone was going to be, but they weren't really that. These guys are the real deal. They're the coolest guys you could ever meet in a million years. And I just think, I'm a lucky guy to be part of that fraternity. It's a very cool fraternity.
You think don't meet your heroes doesn't apply to that group?
No. And I think that it like every general rule, it's generally true. Part of what makes it so unique. I mean, once again, like I say, if you were to try and create a branding vehicle for a university that combines athletic greatness with academic greatness, and you wanted to come up with a bunch of figures that represented the greatest athletes that accomplished at a very high level, but also accomplished out in the world, well, John Wooden, Bill Walton, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Rayford Johnson, Jackie Joyner-Kersee, Ann Myers Drysdale. These are the greatest figures in the history of college sports, and they all went to UCLA. I mean, there are other schools. It was funny. When Mick Cronin first came here, Bill Walton and I put together a list of all the people who had gone into broadcast media. And it was stunning. There were like 70 names on the list. I mean, you tend not to think about some of the people you see on TV. A fella like you from Bakersfield may not know that, Reggie Miller went to UCLA and Sean Farnham went to UCLA. And, all of these guys that you see on TV, they all went to UCLA. And you mix it. I mean, we had one guy at Cincinnati, a guy named Lewis Johnson, who was a track broadcaster. There were like 70. I mean, Troy Aikman went to UCLA. Big broadcast careers. They're absolutely everywhere. And yet we don't really promote that within the UCLA community. But I think it's something to pay attention to. It's not purely coincidence that so many people come out of this institution able to express themselves and entertain and communicate in an effective manner. Because if you ever actually look at how many Bruins are in the media business, it's mind-boggling.
The alumni network here is staggering.
Mhm.
I mean, you mentioned some names there. Troy Aikman, he was actually going to come on this podcast, but things got a little busy.
But eventually, if you stay after him, people feel very connected to have been a Bruin. I think it does become a very, very big part of your identity. Clearly, for me, I mean, well, I guess there are 12 of us now, 12 guys who won 3 national championships, and we all played for Coach, and 12 guys in the world. That's a pretty cool fraternity. Wow. Crazy. Number 1 public university in America. Wow. Crazy. And I just think it's something, maybe we don't have the greatest football team in the world. We have a lot of constraints. Our football stadium's 25 miles away. We don't have alumni that give like crazy, but at the end of the day, this university is defined by a lot more than its football team. And listen, in 5 years, when Saudi Arabia owns the SEC, college sports isn't going to mean anything anyhow. This is Thelma and Louise heading for the cliff. What they're doing now.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do some more research on sort of the back end of collegiate sports, but it's super interesting. I mean, to be able to kind of view the timeline of where it was in Wooden's day and sort of where it's heading now.
Well, by the way, I don't know if you noticed the other day, Ohio State, $35 million in the hole this year. These losses in public institutions are unsustainable. And I think our athletic department's $150 million in the hole. These are unsustainable losses. And by the way, there were years where truly athletics and education did kind of have a somewhat uneasy partnership. Is there really any partnership left at all? Can you imagine when these guys, you see them on TV every weekend, they've been in the portal, this is now their 3rd school. What does their transcript look like? Could you imagine what the admissions office says? These guys are going from this school to that school to this school. It could take them 17 years to graduate. But no one cares. These kids spending all this time on airplanes. Airplanes are bad for you. Time zones, bad for you. Back and forth and back and forth. But they don't care because it's money. We're going to make more money. And, I really do think that we have lost a lot of the educational component, and it's sad. Saddens me.
Well, I'm going to bring it home. Student athletes today at UCLA sort of almost notoriously struggle with the balance between academics and athletics, and there's huge pressure on both sides. I know Wooden emphasized athletics as being secondary. You're here to learn, you're here to get an education.
Right.
You're here to get your degree. And you've already acknowledged that things are a little different now. What sort of advice can you give to students who may be struggling with that balancing act at UCLA?
Boy, that's
Loaded question.
A great question that I'm not sure I really have an answer to. My heart goes out to so many of the student athletes. This is not just football players. This is, women competing in every sport as well, who are now expected to do film study and be in the weight room. And, we didn't have a weight room. I never looked at film. All those hours in the day when, I feel like a lot of my college education, I read voraciously. Not necessarily the textbooks, but I was always reading. Now they're on airplanes. Now they're having to go to the weight room. Now they're having to go to the film study room. It's like, whew, it really has become a professional situation. And so, I guess part of what I would say for a lot of young people is, if you love playing sports and want to go to school, maybe you should look at a school that isn't a Power 5 school, where the reality is that winning is so important for the bottom line that everybody's pushing too hard. Because it's what it feels like, is everybody's pushing too hard. That these kids don't really get to go to college like I did. We got to go to college. We got to protest the war. We got to go on strike. We got to do a lot of crazy things. And I never looked at film and, never took these long plane flights. I mean, part of the reason we rarely flew is because every game at Pauley Pavilion was sold out. And so J.D. Morgan said, why should we leave? We're making a fortune. Let's just stay here and play. So we just didn't travel that much. But, some of the travel is fun, but I think on the whole, it's very, very hard on these young athletes. So, If you think your future is as a professional, and, this is what you got to put yourself through because everybody is. But, if at the end of the day you see your college career ending in after college, that you're going to go and be a professional in something else, which of course is true for 97% of the student athletes, you got to enforce some things for yourself. Maybe I won't play. Maybe I won't play as much as I like to play. It's not the end of the world if it means that I'm going to flunk a test next week. I mean, Coach Wooden, the absolute excuse, I have to study. Now, there were certain guys who, if they said they had to study, it was kind of suspicious. But that was a get out of practice free. The other thing that I would tell you, though, was nobody wanted to miss practice. Basketball's a load of fun if nobody's cussing you out. I got to play against the best players in the game every day. It was a thrill. We loved it. I mean, it was hard and competitive, but loved it. And, the guy who played against me every day, Henry Bibby, we were freshman most valuable players. Henry and I are like brothers today. We're still best friends. If I was in school today, I'd probably be in a transfer portal. Oh, God, I'm glad I'm not around today because the temptation would be so great to leave. And I just had the experience of a lifetime here, which, of course, if you had told me after my last game, this is the greatest thing you ever did, I might have punched you in the nose because it didn't feel that way. But you know what? A lot of stuff that doesn't feel good in life ends up being great stuff. And playing for John Wooden didn't feel so good at the time, but over time, nothing could be better.
Try to have fun is probably a good way to end that off. It's all a little bit stressful, but
absolutely
enjoy it.
Have some gratitude. You're lucky to be at UCLA. And get out and meet people. Don't sit there staring at your phone. Put your thumbs in your pocket, look people in the eye, and make relationships that you will carry forward into life. And your life will turn out so much better for it. Get your face out of the screen. Is that a really awful last words to leave on a podcast? Oh, my God.
No, I think it's very apt, considering most people will be listening to this on their phones. Oh. Well, Andy, thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this discussion.
Enjoyed it.
And I hope to see you at Pauley soon.
I'll be there Tuesday. You better show up.
I will be there.
I'm right behind the bench, 10 rows up. Come say hi.
6 p.m. All right. Sounds good.
Pauley will be packed.
Hope so.
Go Bruins. All right,
Go Bruins.
buddy. Thank you.